somewhere in the ancient city of Nippur, in the river valleys between the Tigris and the Euphrates, around 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, a man pressed a stylus into a piece of wet clay no larger than his palm. He was not a king. He was not a priest. He was a merchant, dusty from the road, tired in the way that men who carry weight across long distances are always tired. And what he pressed into that clay was not a prayer. It was not a poem. It was a promise that someone would pay him back. That tablet still exists. It sits today in a museum, and archaeologists have read it. It records the transfer of grain, a specific quantity, a specific borrower, a specific term of repayment, and something remarkable, a fee for the waiting, what we would call interest, the world's oldest written record of a debt. Now, 3 questions sit inside that small piece of clay, and this story answers all 3. How did debt, the idea that one person could owe another something they did not yet have, first appear in human history? Why did the people of ancient Mesopotamia need to invent it? And what happened? Very quickly, when a system designed to help people survive became something far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone who pressed their first stylus into wet clay ever intended. Let us begin before the clay, before writing, before cities, because debt, it turns out, did not begin with clay tablets or merchant ledgers. It began much earlier than that. It began with human beings trying to survive winter. Picture a hunting band moving across the grasslands of what is now northern Iraq. Perhaps 10,000 years ago, 12 people, 15, enough to cooperate. Not so many that cooperation becomes complicated. One of them has had a good hunt. He has brought down something large, an auroch, a wild cattle ancestor the size of a small cart horse, and there is more meat than he and his immediate family can eat before it spoils. The others in the band are hungry, so he shares it, but he does not share it the way you might share a gift. He shares it the way people in small, tight bands have always shared, with memory. You fed me today. I will feed you when my luck turns, and yours does not. There is no clay tablet, there is no stylus, but there is an understanding, ancient, human, deeply wired into our social machinery, that what passes between people carries an obligation, that the gift creates the debt. Anthropologists have documented this pattern in every remaining hunter-gatherer society studied in the modern era. The Kung-san people of the Kalahari have a word for it, Exaro, a system of reciprocal gift exchange that binds the community together through an invisible web of mutual obligation. A gift given is a debt created, not recorded anywhere except in the minds of the people involved, but enforced by reputation, by social pressure, by the simple terror of being the person who takes and never gives back, which in a small band is not just embarrassing, but potentially fatal. So here is the thing that most people do not understand about the first debt. It was not invented by merchants or scribes or kings. It was invented by hungry human beings trying to survive uncertainty together. The clay tablet is just the moment it was written down. Now, the question is, what changed between the hunting band and the tablet? And the answer is scale. The answer is cities. By 3500 BC, the southern plains of Mesopotamia, a flat, river-threaded landscape that the Greeks would later call the land between the rivers, had become home to something the world had never seen before. dense human settlements. Not villages of 30 families who all knew each other's names and faces. Cities, Uruk, at its height, held perhaps 40,000 people inside its mud brick walls. Ur was larger still, and inside these cities, a problem appeared that the hunting band never had to solve. How do you track obligation between strangers? In the hunting band, memory worked. Everyone knew everyone. If you took and never gave back, the whole band knew within a day. But in a city of 40,000 people, memory alone could not carry the weight of economic life. A grain merchant who lent a portion of his stores to a farmer before the harvest could not rely on social pressure alone to guarantee repayment. The farmer might deny the arrangement. The merchant might forget the exact terms. The farmer might die before the harvest came in, and his son might claim to know nothing of his father's debts. The city needed something that memory could not provide: proof. And this is where the clay comes in. The scribes of ancient Mesopotamia, a priestly and administrative class trained in the temples of Ur and Nippur and Lagash, had already developed a system of marks pressed into clay to track the contents of grain silos and the movement of goods through temple storehouses. What they realized, with the brilliant simplicity of all genuinely important inventions, was that the same system could track promises, not just what was here, but what was owed. The earliest debt tablets found by archaeologists are temple records. The great temples of Mesopotamia were not merely religious institutions, they were the first banks. A farmer who needed seed grain before planting season could approach the temple storehouse and receive it. The scribe would record the transaction on a clay tablet, press a cylinder seal into the wet clay to authenticate it, and the tablet would be stored. When the harvest came, the farmer returned the original grain plus a portion more, typically 1/6 of the principal, a rate that appears again and again in the ancient records, with the kind of consistency that suggests it was not negotiated fresh each time, but had hardened into custom. 1/6. If you borrowed 60 units of grain, you returned 70. The extra 10 was not called interest yet. That word would come much later, from a very different civilization, but it was interest in every functional sense. A fee for the use of something that belonged to someone else. A price for time. Now, here is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the Mesopotamians did not stop at grain. Within a few centuries, the debt system had expanded to cover silver. The shekel, not a coin, not yet, but a specific weight of silver, roughly 8 1/3 grams, became the standard unit of account across the trading networks of the ancient Near East. Debts were recorded in shekels. Wages were denominated in shekels. Tax obligations to the palace were calculated in shekels, and the interest rate on silver loans hardened by the time of the Great Law Codes at 1/5 of the principal per year, 20% annually, payable in silver or its equivalent in grain at the market rate of the day. If you think that sounds high, consider what the lender was risking. There were no courts, not in the modern sense. There were no bailiffs, no collection agencies, no credit bureaus. If a borrower decided not to repay, the lender's recourse was limited. The law codes of Hammurabi, written in Babylon around 1754 BC, roughly 1200 years after the first debt tablets, contain entire sections devoted to debt disputes because the disputes were constant, because the temptation to deny or delay repayment was real, and because the consequences of a broken debt could ripple through an entire community. A farmer who borrowed seed grain and lost his harvest to a flood was not simply in personal trouble. Every person who had loaned him something, and every person who depended on those people, felt the tremor. But here is the real problem. The one that the first scribe pressing the first debt tablet did not see, and perhaps could not have seen. Debt, once invented, does not stay simple. It grows, it compounds, and in a world where harvests fail and floods come, and disease takes a field worker at the wrong moment of the planting season, the gap between what was borrowed and what could be repaid could widen faster than any farmer could close it. A good year covered the principal, a bad year added to it. 2 bad years in a row, and a small farmer who had borrowed seed grain to survive was now working not for himself, but for his creditor. The land his family had farmed for generations was now, by the terms of the clay tablet, collateral against a debt that was growing faster than the crop could grow. The ancient Mesopotamians had a word for this condition. They called it debt bondage. And by the time of the Sumerian city-states, sometime around 2400 BC, it was common enough that a specific class of people existed in the cities and farms of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. People who had borrowed, failed to repay, and were now bound to their creditors as labor, sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime, sometimes passing the obligation to their children. The same pattern, 3,000 years later, would appear in Athens, where Solon found the fields of Attica dotted with stones marking land pledged against debt, and where Athenian citizens were being sold into slavery in foreign markets to settle obligations their fathers had made in a bad year. It would appear in Republican Rome, where the nexum, a brutal contract that bound a debtor's body to his creditor until the debt was discharged, became one of the central grievances driving the conflict between the patricians who lent and the plebeians who borrowed. Different civilizations, different languages, different centuries, the same trap. The Mesopotamians, to their credit, saw the trap early, and they invented something to deal with it that is, if you think about it carefully, one of the most remarkable economic interventions in all of human history. They invented debt cancellation. The great kings of Sumer and Akkad and later Babylon had a practice, documented in royal proclamations going back to at least 2400 BC, of periodically cancelling all outstanding agricultural debts across the kingdom. The word for it in Sumerian was amagi. It means, roughly, return to the mother, return to the original state, wipe the slate. And it was not charity, it was policy, because the kings understood, with the practical clarity of people who needed soldiers and farmers and taxpayers, that a population crushed under unpayable debt was a population that could not function. Fields left unfarmed because the farmer had fled. His creditors were fields that produced no grain for the temple. Families sold into debt bondage were families that could not send sons to defend the city walls. The debt cancellation was not generosity, it was maintenance. The same way you let a field lie fallow so it can produce again next season. The Hebrew tradition of the Jubilee year, described in the book of Leviticus, which was likely written during or after the Babylonian exile, echoes this Mesopotamian practice so closely that most historians believe it was directly influenced by it. Every 50 years, debts forgiven, slaves freed, land returned to its original family. A reset, a recognition that the mathematics of compound obligation, left unchecked, will eventually consume the social fabric that makes economic life possible at all. And yet, neither the Mesopotamian kings with their amagi proclamations, nor the Hebrew legal tradition with its jubilee, nor the Athenian democracy with Solon's Seisachtheia. His famous shaking off of burdens that cancelled the debt stones from the fields of Attica. None of them eliminated debt. None of them even tried, because they all understood, in the bone-deep practical way that people who live close to scarcity always understand, that debt is not a pathology. It is a tool for moving resources through time, from moments of abundance to moments of need, from those who have surplus to those who have deficit, in a way that makes both parties better off. Most of the time, when things go reasonably well, the problem was never the tool. The problem was what happens when the tool is applied to lives that do not go reasonably well. The merchant who pressed his stylus into wet clay in Nippur around 3000 BC was not inventing oppression. He was solving a problem. The problem of trust between strangers, the problem of cooperation at scale, the problem of how to move grain from someone who has it to someone who needs it when neither the land nor the sky will make any guarantees about next season. He was doing what human beings have always done when they encounter a problem that memory and goodwill alone cannot solve. He was writing it down. The clay tablet in the museum does not belong to the merchant or the debtor who pressed their seals into it. It belongs to all of us, because every obligation you have ever made, every time you have said, "I will pay you back, I will make it right, give me time and I will settle it," you were reaching back across 5,000 years to that dusty room in Nippur, where a tired man with a stylus invented the oldest financial instrument in human history. He just did not know, yet, how much it would cost some people to honor it.